Hi everyone, Ed Amoroso here from Tag Cyber, and I am sitting with my friend Phil Quade, the Chief Information Security Officer for Fortinet. Welcome, Phil.
Hi, Ed. Happy to be here.
Welcome to New York City today.
Big town. Happy to be part of it.
And hot. I think it must be 100% humidity the last couple of days.
I felt that.
So glad to have you here. Now, Phil, had a great career in government and industry. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I'm blessed to be working for a great company called Fortinet right now. It's a Silicon Valley innovator with a worldwide presence. But a lot of people ask me about how I got to Fortinet.
Yeah.
And I spent 33 plus years at the National Security Agency.
Right.
With this fascinating career. I loved every minute of it. And now I'd like to take some of those things, those techniques, those highly specialized and effective techniques that we did at the National Security Agency, and apply them to build a better cybersecurity company.
Yeah. You were there when the Orange Book was being put together, weren't you?
I was.
It's a book that anybody over 40 remembers, and under 30 maybe never even heard of. It was quite a work, right?
It was ahead of its time. It introduced some great concepts like TCBs, Trusted Computing Bases, which I know that you had a hand in helping influencing the standard and actually creating products as well.
Yeah. If only we could have kept some of those concepts. Like I often think, what would happen if multi-level security had somehow found a better market? We might not have like as many worms and break-ins, right? I mean, if you had labeling things and enforcing policy.
Same with authentication.
Yeah.
I oftentimes say that if we had solved the authentication problem early on, it's the equivalent of solving the world peace for internet security. You know, authenticating people to machines, data to processes, software and applications. But because of lack of strong and trustworthy authentication, we've been compensating for that for a long time.
You could argue that may be the most important primitive, right, in architecture. Like, who are you? And can you provide evidence of whatever you just told me?
So I like to use your term. I sometimes relate it to, I ask, well, what in the fundamental sciences, I believe you can describe everything by either chemistry or physics. Yeah. and so I ask the question, well, what are the primitives or the fundamental elements of cybersecurity? And I think that's one of them. It's authentication. I don't know what the whole list is, but you could even argue that privacy is one of those, right? In order to address the problems of information sharing or cybersecurity at speed and scale, we're going to have to solve the problems of detecting and mitigating privacy risk at speed and scale. So I often ask the high-performing teams I get a chance to work with, what are the primitives of cybersecurity? And let's make sure we're doing those really, really well.
You know, it's funny if you go back like to remember the old Baltimore conference in the 80s and 90s, it was all about kind of encryption. Like most of the research was encryption, and certainly the agency, best place in the world, maybe 3 or 4 other countries have good encryption technology as well. It seems like in industry it's not as important. I don't know, if I asked me one difference between, say, government work and commercial, it's that in government there seems to be a lot more emphasis on encryption, but when you do a protection architecture, say for a bank, it's more about architecture, more of the setup of firewalls, real-time controls, incident response, authentication, and less about encryption. Does that make sense at all? I don't know if you noticed that, maybe not.
So you're a smart interviewer, so I won't insult you with a tutorial, but government folks are very much focused on the confidentiality aspect of security policies, where folks like the banks are really interested in things like integrity,
protecting
and availability, making sure the data is trustworthy and it's there when the consumer needs it. And so I think you're right. The use of encryption for confidentiality has been a government influence, whereas the private sector, it's more about integrity and especially in the critical infrastructure availability.
Yeah, that's cool. So what brought you to Fortinet? What attracted you about the company?
Fortinet has technologies and strategies that reminded me of how we've done some business back in my old job. So hopefully I won't tell an old war story.
No, we want more war stories. Let's hear them.
So a number of years ago, let's say 2006, 2007, then Presidents Bush and Vice President Cheney came out to visit NSA to to hear about what we were doing on behalf of the nation. And they were quite impressed by the speed and scale which we were able to prosecute the foreign intelligence mission.
Bush famously had a lot of respect for and support for the agency. That was my experience. I always felt like he took it very seriously.
And as did his vice president. Yeah, so it was a receptive audience, and what we said is, you know, all the things that we're doing here, there's analogous strategies, techniques we could use to help support the nation from a domestic cybersecurity perspective. So he said, okay, come back and tell us more. And so I was involved in the office that was making that pitch. And to their credit, they turned it into an initiative called the Comprehensive National Cybersecurity Initiative. Right. And it was a $17 billion, with a B, 5-year project that the White House adopted as its own, and NSA played its part.
CNCI.
CNCI was its name. And it was fundamentally about adopting a new security strategy of doing detection and mitigation in cyber-relevant time, informed by intelligence. So you could hopefully get out ahead of the adversary and do some compensation. Funny, long story short, NSA got a good chunk of that money in order to, primarily it was to help with the threat part of that. What could we do to provide insights of what the capabilities and intentions were of our adversaries? And the way what we built we called it a SIGINT system, Signals Intelligence System. We had some very large foreign intelligence collection assets, and we created lots of small, more precise precision assets, and that was very interesting. But the really interesting part is that we decided to link them together to cooperate as a team, figuring that the sum of the individual parts is not as good as all those individual parts working together. That the whole can be better than the individual parts. So we built something called a fabric that allowed those things to collaborate as authorized and appropriate. So fast forward to my Edward Snowden has since compromised some of that strategy, and that's
hole
why
in the fabric, right?
Correct, and that's why I'm able to talk about that a little bit more openly now. But fast forward to when I joined Fortinet in the past year, I wanted to join a company that was also able to do things at speed and scale. So specifically, Fortinet has something called a security fabric.
They do use the same term,
it does,
right?
The same term, and guess what it does? It connects the different solutions that Fortinet offers that might work in, say, at the endpoint, the midpoint, the cloud, at the carrier, and it gets each of those security solutions to work together as a team. So not only does it become more effective, but it helps reduce the complexity, because you might have the best products out there, but if the wetware fails you, software, hardware, and wetware, the human frailty can't handle the complexity of managing these great systems, you're not going to have good security. So not only does it increase security, but it decreases complexity.
Like about the fabric kind of metaphor, that, and I bet you saw this, through your career. If you're going to hack something, look for seams, right? Look for interfaces that are weak. Look for gaps in responsibility. Look for an architecture that left some loose end that was not sort of covered. It's always that stuff that gets hit, the thing that you didn't expect.
It's the weak link in the chain argument. Right.
So you do need that concept of sort of a blanket fabric over an architecture.
So the fabric, it's a great practical and analogous way of talking about how to do security.
Your CEO is quite an engineer. That seems like an engineering culture at Fortinet. Am I reading that right?
Yeah, there's to his credit, he's also a businessman. There's in Silicon Valley, if you successfully start up a company, sell it for $1 billion, you're a godlike figure in Silicon Valley. And Fortinet's Ken Z not only did that, but he's now done it twice. So Fortinet is his second $1 billion company. And one of the reasons why I'm there is that I told you earlier, is to help take some of these really, really high-end techniques to address the problems of speed and scale. But in addition to that, it's to help the company grow from a $1 billion company to a $10 billion company.
Wow.
Because the things that you do as a startup aren't necessarily the same things you would do all the time when going to a $10 billion company.
It's different practices. Is that what you think that's part of the value prop when people are buying Fortinet products? Is it this this drive to size and scale and efficiency and innovation. You know, those are all words you say about big companies, big established companies. Is that kind of what you get, like
Right.
small company feel with all the big company attributes?
Oh, that's a
Am I
great way
reading
of
that
saying
right?
it. We haven't used that as a marketing slogan, but in reality, that's
You're welcome
that-
to trademark that if you like.
In reality, that's I think that's what we have. I mean, that's the invigoration I get by working in Fortinet. It's a very, very innovative company, you know, centered in Sunnyvale, so you get that
Yeah.
vibe. Yet it's by volume, by units shipped, it outsells Cisco, Juniper, Palo Alto, Checkpoint. We outsell them in terms of numbers of security appliances shipped per year massively. So it's this big worldwide company, but it's maintained that innovation flavor. So again, what we need to do is sustain the innovation part of the company, but when appropriate, build in some enduring, repeatable processes that allow you to grow to a larger size.
What's the right way to innovate?
If I had the simple answer to that, I'd be a much richer man.
I was hoping you would know the
Yeah,
answer
sorry,
quickly.
that's
No.
proprietary.
What do you think?
Well, I'd like to turn the question around to you in a second, but what Fortinet does, it has a pretty cool combination of having a strategic vision of where it needs to be. So we were going to the cloud before the cloud became cool, so it knew it needed to be there. We were getting ready for IoT before IoT became the breathless thing. So we have vision. The fabric is an example of that.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, when appropriate, we're fast followers. When our customers tell us they need something, we're able to very, very quickly and agilely come up with solutions that get them where they need to be. What are your thoughts, though, on
Well, I think it's
on innovation?
when innovation is a hard thing to program, right? If you and I grab 20 or 30 people and we say, go innovate, they're going to go, huh?
Right.
But if you put a weird collage of people, diverse people, different backgrounds, and you challenge them to come up with some interesting things, you can't program it, but you can create the conditions, as you said, right? You create a small company feel, and you try and reward great ideas, and you're open to things that are different. I think that's how you do it. And
I'm with you. I
That's
call that
NSA was
creating
like
creating
that,
high
too.
performing teams.
right? I mean, the agency couldn't find more interesting people.
You give them a near impossible challenge.
Yeah.
You set a clear goal for what you need to be,
Yeah.
and then you support them with the
Yeah.
right type of coaching and resources needed to get the job done.
It's hard to manage, though, because the tendency is you want to go in and have the daily, weekly status reports. How you doing with that innovation?
Right.
That never works.
Yeah,
right?
you can't
That's a disaster.
do a project management plan for innovation.
No, you really can't. I think that's why so many companies struggle. So I think in business schools we teach budding managers to use metrics and to be data driven and to use automation tools and things like that to guide the management process. And personally, I think it's the opposite of that. I think it's doing what Ken did by hiring you. You select great people, you put them in an environment that makes sense, and to your point, you give them a tough goal and say, go have at it. You know, there's no tools or
I'm
metrics
with you.
there,
and,
right?
and then, at the risk of contradicting myself and maybe you, on the other hand, there's time where repeatable processes do indeed matter. And let me give you an example of that. Right now, we're about to launch inside our company something that we called risk spiders. And as ominous that sounds, it's not what you think. It's we want to be able to repeatedly characterize risk levels across its dimensions. So most people think that risk is some combination in cybersecurity of threat and vulnerability.
Yeah.
But of course, the third arm of that is consequences. What are the bad things you're trying to avoid? So what we've done as an executive team at Fortinet is we've identified the top 12 bad consequences we need to avoid from a cybersecurity perspective. And then are saying, what are the risk spiders? How do we measure the threat, the vulnerability, and the bad consequence in terms of severity? And then we're looking to drive down and mitigate either the consequence, the threat, or the vulnerability.
Wow, I love that. What are a couple of the things of the 12? What are a couple I should be worried about?
Sure. So not too surprising, but theft of IP. Right, that would be one. So what's the consequence? What's the vulnerability? What's the risk? But also what's the insider threat? What's the supply chain, not threat, supply chain risk, insider risk.
Threats.
Right. But it can also be something softer, like what's the risk of getting your brand sullied by a major vulnerability compromise?
Yeah. You know, I don't think that contradicts the innovation thing at all. Like, for example, if we were to design an assembly line for a factory, we might come up with something very innovative. But once it's in place, a production line, like anything, has to have clear, repeatable practice. So I think you can innovate, but when you're operationalizing, you know, you can have chaos.
So that's encouraging, because I think that's one of my roles in the company is to help sustain the great innovation that we have, and then where practical and appropriate, help institutionalize some of these things into repeatable processes that are less personality dependent.
Now, you and I have a lot of runway behind us together.
We do.
So we can probably, you know, extrapolate our experience out and make some predictions. So I'm going to ask you to go out on a limb and help us. What is going to happen in the next 10, 15 years in cyber? I'll give you a couple choices.
Okay.
One would be we muddle along the way we've been muddling. Another is things get really bad, like some terrible things happen. And the third is things get really good. But before you agree to answer number 3, you'd have to help me understand why things get better, because I think they've gotten worse the last few years. So if you're just purely extrapolating the way things have been, then it would be very hard not to say they'll just keep getting worse. But you and I are both optimists. So what do you think? Do any of those sound right? Or maybe there's some other choices in there. Where do you think we're headed?
Love to hear your opinions on that as well. My crystal ball looks like this. I expect the industry and the country and the world at large to embrace solutions that are based on automation and integration. Again, to address the problems of speed and scale, you have to embrace automation and integration.
I agree.
So I'm happy to see the favored winds blowing behind, for example, artificial intelligence. So that's a term and a science that went out of vogue for a good 25 years. But what it really is having well-scrubbed data, appropriately labeled, and having risk-based decision engines that can help assist with human-level decision making.
Neural nets.
So I expect that. I expect automation and integration and putting humans above the loop rather than having humans in the loop all the time. And I hope I'm positive that will get us to a better place. Number one.
You know, cloud is an example, sort of that. Like, I think I remember, and I'm sure you do, always being in a conference room where it felt like the security guys are on one side of the table and IT network and others on the other side, and there's a clash where IT wants to do something and security's going, no, and it just has been like that forever. But now it seems like everybody's on the same side of the table saying, distribute, virtualize, use cloud, use mobile, software-defined things, use automation, try new, like those, for the first time, I think it seems like the CIO and the CISO wouldn't be going like this, but does that sound right? Like, that gives me hope.
I think you're right that it used to be that there was the security person's job and there's the IT person's job. And the good news is that security is an IT person's job.
It's all jumbled.
There's no such thing as give me IT. It's give me secure IT. So any tensions that exist in the past will already have or soon melted away. One area, though, I do think there's a little too big of a gulp that I expect to get better with time is the critical infrastructure protection.
Oh, yeah.
And what I mean is that, as you know, we all know, critical infrastructure is mostly owned and operated by the private sector. However, there is a role for public-private collaboration. So, for example, we can't expect every mom and pop critical infrastructure company to be able to take on nation states. So there will be times when
unfair fight.
It's an unfair fight, right? So there's going to be times where there needs to be richer collaboration between the private sector and public sector in helping to protect one of these infrastructures or one of its companies. So what I think we need to do more of is more practice. What does it mean to collaborate in protecting and defending these critical infrastructures? And not only will that get us to a better spot, but it will create some muscle memory between the public and private sector. Just like you said, there's now muscle memory between the IT and the security folks. it'll get us used to working together to address these really thorny national problems.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I do think that area, I would agree, is still thorny. I don't think you have government and industry sitting on the same side of the table today. I agree 100% that they need to find a way to get on the same side. I'm not sure how you do it. Like, there's so much complexity there. There are different countries that have different objectives, and a multinational firm sits in all of these, like a bank might be operating in 20 countries, half of whom may have fundamentally different national objectives than, say, the United States, may not even trust the United States, might consider them adversary. It's become so difficult when you have that. I always think that there's like this meta view that rather than politically driven, it's more about government and industry providing services that support people and society in a reasonable way. And then there's things that are less reasonable, hacking and crime and all this other stuff. And you almost like to draw the gulf there rather than these political boundaries, because like a worm, a botnet originated worm or DDoS attack, it's government and industry, it's all the same, right? DNS knows no boundaries, right? It just, so I'm hopeful that maybe the way to get around that is to blur the distinction more between government and industry at the IT level. I know you still have to have countries, but BGP doesn't, work differently in one part of Earth than another. It's a protocol, and it'd be nice if we could figure out how to, as infrastructure operators, recognize that being less nationalistic matches the technology better than being nationalistic. You know what I mean? Okay to be proud of your country, certainly, but how do you operate DNS on a political boundary basis? You can't. So, I don't know. These are hard problems. Well, welcome to the commercial industry. It's fun, isn't it?
It's great to be part of the commercial side, where the commercial products are the old tide that floats all boats. They can be used not only by other companies in the private sector, but they can be used by the government as well. So it's great to be part of that type of solution.
Fortinet is lucky to have you. Their customers are lucky to have you, and I feel very lucky that you spent some time with us today.
So you're kind. Fortinet is honored to serve the commercial sector, the government sector, and the critical infrastructure sector as well. And thanks for helping us get out that message.
Thank you for coming by.
Thank you.
Nice to see you. And we'll see you next time.